Dear students, welcome to a lecture on Gulliver's Travels. In this lecture, I will talk about the social and political background of the novel because I feel unless and until you know the socio-political background, you will not be able to understand and appreciate this particular novel. This, for your information, is a lecture mainly for the undergraduate students, fourth semester. Now let us start. And as I use PowerPoint, I think you will be able to understand my lecture better. And I have decided to deliver the lecture through some points. Now here are the points that I hope to discuss in the course of my lecture. Now what are the points that I hope to discuss? Sweep's political belief, and I feel that if you do not know the author and his political belief, his stance on contemporary socio-political situation, it's very hard for us to understand this particular novel. Next, I will focus on contemporary social and political situation, and under this topic I will focus on the following things: the Stuart and the Hanover. I'll focus on the following things here: the Stuart and the Hanover, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Anglicanism, the Restoration, the Glorious Revolution, reign of Queen Anne, and the reign of George I, the Whig and the Tory, and lastly, the exclusion crisis. Next, I will focus on Gulliver's Travels and the contemporary political references. I mean, how the novel refers to contemporary political incidents, contemporary political events, how the novel or how the narrative builds up a parallelism between contemporary socio-political events and the narrative. And then I will try to draw a conclusion. But let's start with Sweep's life and his stance on contemporary socio-political situation, or Sweep's political belief. Now, Jonathan Swift, who was born in 1667, was an Irish author by origin. Now, he was brought up in Protestant tradition. He was adhered to Irish Church, which was a part of Anglican Church. Now, I will talk about Anglicanism, I will talk about Protestantism later on in my lecture. So he was at bottom a devotee of Irish Church because he was brought up to respect Irish Church. It may be said that he was very ambitious to get ecclesiastical positions and favor. That means he was always ambitious to have posts in church, in ecclesiastical administration. That's why he journeyed between England and Ireland. But he hardly got that favor initially. In his early phase of his life, he was a Whig man. Now, we just know for the time being that he was a Whig man. He was affiliated to the party called the Whig Party. Now, I will talk about Whig Party later on. The Whig Party. But later, in 1710, he shifted to the other party, that is the Tory Party. So, this date is very important. In 1710, he shifted to the Tory Party. So earlier he was a Whig man, but later on in his life he shifted to the Tory party. And he also edited their periodical, The Examiner. And I hope you know that the 18th century is held as a great period of periodicals. You'll have lots of periodicals in this period. Okay, 18th century is also held as an age of reason. So that's not the point here. That's not relevant here. Now, why did he change his party? That's the question. Why did he change from being a Whig man to a Tory man? That's the point here. Now, in 1707, he was sent to Queen Anne in London, who was then in power in London. And he was sent, of course, from Ireland with a proposal of having some money. Which is famously known in history as Queen Anne's bounty for the Irish clergy. Now, this huge amount of money, a lump sum amount of money, was already granted to the Anglican Church, to the members of the Anglican Church. Now, Swift also wanted similar amount of money or something for the Irish Church as well, but he was summarily rejected. Now, this had a lasting impact on Swift's life, on Swift's writing, because after that he changed his party, because Queen Anne was a monarch with a bent towards when Swift was rejected by Queen Anne, Swift found that the Tory party was more sympathetic to his cause. This is very important. When Swift's proposal was rejected, he found that the other party, that is the Tory party, was more sympathetic to his cause. That's why he tried to be with the Tory party from that time. Hence his change from being a member of Whig party to being a member of Tory party. So, being a Protestant in belief, Swift in his life, as I told you, a member of the Whig party, and later he broke free from the party. His Gulliver's Travels is largely speaking a satire on the Whig administration led by Robert Walpole. We know Gulliver's Travels is a satire on the human nature, on human custom, creed, and whatnot. But largely speaking, it refers to the contemporary Whig administration, and that Whig administration was led back then by a man called Robert Walpole. So, Swift was in his early life a supporter of the Whig party, and later when the Whig government led by Lord Godolphin, this is also very important, the Whig government led by Lord Godolphin didn't allow the grant, that is the Queen Anne's bounty. Queen Anne, allowed the grant for the Irish Church. He changed or turned to the Tory party because he found, as I told you, the Tory party was more sympathetic to his cause. Another thing that you must remember, or that is very important in Swift's life, is being a Protestant by nature, he supported the Glorious Revolution. Now, I will talk about Glorious Revolution a little later. He supported the Glorious Revolution because this revolution was pitched against Catholic linearity. Now, Glorious Revolution, I will talk about that later on, began in 1688. So, and this was set against a kind of Catholic tradition. But Swift was a supporter of the Glorious Revolution, because Glorious Revolution was ultimately a tradition which uh, heavily depended on the Protestant tradition. Now, with this, let us move on to our next point, that is a contemporary socio-political or social and political scenario. Contemporary social and political scenario means the latter half of the 17th century and the first half of the 18th century. Now here you need to understand a lot of things. Let me get back to one of the earlier slides here. This you understand. These things you need to understand. The Stuart and the Hanover, the Catholicism, Protestantism, and Anglicanism, and the following points. Here, the Stuart was a royal dynasty of Scotland that reigned in England and Scotland from 1603 to 1714. So, the name Stuart stands for a royal dynasty. This much you should remember. The Stuart names for a royal dynasty that reigned in England and Scotland from 1603 to 1714. But when in 1714 Queen Anne died, another dynasty came over. Another royal house came over, and this time the royal house was of German origin, and the royal house was called the Hanover. And the Hanoverian dynasty reigned from 1714, with George I being ascended to the throne of Britain. So George I was the first king, first monarch of the Hanoverian dynasty. Now, Catholicism and Protestantism. This is very important because you'll find references to Catholicism, to Protestantism, to Anglicanism while you study not just this text but other texts of English literature. So while Catholicism refers to the old tradition of Christianity, Protestantism refers to a new tradition of Christianity. Now, what is that? Catholicism is if you say, the mainstream of Christianity. Protestantism grew out of this Catholicism because some people thought that the tradition of Christianity, the religion of Christianity, the institution called Christianity got corrupted and some malpractices got into it. So in order to purify the religion, in order to purify the institution, some people tried to purge the religion of all these malpractices. And that's how Protestantism grew. So Protestantism grew as a protest to those corruptions, to those malpractices that got entangled with the mainstream Christianity called Catholicism. Now, this Protestantism and Anglicanism was a part and still a part of this Protestantism or this Protestant tradition. Now, Irish Church is a part of Anglican Church. So, both the Anglican Church and the Irish Church are parts of Protestant tradition. This you have to remember. So, as I told you, Swift was adhered to the Irish Church. That means he was a Protestant at bottom. Now, with this, let us also try to understand some history. Now, we have to understand history from mid 17th century. From mid 17th century. These two dates are very important: 1660 and 1649. 1660 and 1649. Now, why are these two dates important? Now, in 1660, we have the Restoration. What does that mean? To understand Restoration, you have to go back a little bit. In 1649, in 1642, we have the Civil War in England. In 1649, Charles I was in power. Now, Charles I was beheaded. He was decapitated in 1649. This decapitation ended the rule of monarchy in England, in Britain. This decapitation ended the rule of monarchy in Britain. So from 1649, we have a new period called Commonwealth period. We have a new period called Commonwealth period. And this Commonwealth period continued to exist between till 1660. Now in 1660, again, monarchy was called back. Monarchy was called back to the throne of England. This time, monarchy was restored with Charles II. So in 1649, we have the decapitation of Charles I. And after that, from 1649 to 1660, we have the period called Commonwealth period, when there was no monarchy, there was no monarchical rule. Again, in 1660, we have the restoration of monarchy with Charles II in power. Now, this continued until 1685. Because in 1685, Charles I, the power from Charles I went to James II. So monarchical rule continued until Glorious Revolution took place. Now, Glorious Revolution took place in 1688. In 1688. Now, why is this revolution glorious and what happened? In 1688, James II, who was then in power, had to give away his power to Mary and William of Orange, who then invaded England and took up the English throne. So in 1688, a transfer of power took place. A transfer of power from James II to Mary and William of Orange. Now, this transfer of power took place without a blood being shed. So, as such a major transfer of power took place without a blood being shed, it is called glorious. The revolution is called glorious. Now, from 1688, we have again another kind of rule, like the rule that we had during the Commonwealth period. And this time we have a joint monarch, Mary and William of Orange. Another thing happened with this glorious revolution. Catholicism, which was in force since Restoration till the reign of James II, gave way to Protestantism or Anglicanism in England. This is again very important. So, not only the monarchical rule changed, but also the faith changed. That is very important. Now, William of Orange reigned till 1702. William of Orange reigned till 1702. Then Anne ascended the throne of England as Queen Anne, and she reigned from 1702 to 1714. This period is very important insofar as Gulliver's Travels is concerned. From 1702 to 1714, and in 1714, when Queen Anne died, George I ascended to the throne of England, which also, as I told you, incepted the reign of Hanoverian dynasty. Till 1714, it was the Stuart dynasty which reigned. So you get things clear here up to this. that we have the Restoration, we have the Glorious Revolution, we have the period or we have the rule of Mary and William of Orange, and then we have the rule of Queen Anne, which is very important insofar as this novel is concerned, and then we have the reign of George the First. Now, the next major thing is the Whig party and the Tory party. Now, basically, they are two political parties or two factions which originated in the latter half of the 17th century and is still in existence, although in different names. But these two terms, the Whig and the Tory, were originally terms of abuse. The term Whig was a term applied to horse thieves and later applied to Scottish Presbyterians. And the Tory was the Popish outlaw, and they were originally Irish highwaymen. So the Whig, the term Whig had an origin in Scotland, you may say, or it had a kind of Scottish leaning, whereas the term Tory had a kind of Irish leaning, because the term Tory originally applied to the Irish robbers or highwaymen, right? Now, what did they do? Initially, the Tories supported the hereditary rights of King James. You remember, in 1685, James II ascended to the throne of England. So they supported it. So in nature, you have to understand this. In nature, the Tories were monarchical and they were reclined to the Catholic cause. So the Tories were more with the monarch, more to the side of the Catholicism. Whereas, on the other hand, the Whig were more on the side of the aristocrats, the landowners, and the wealthy middle class or the rising middle class. So there was a clear difference in terms of support, base. The Tory supported the monarch, the Whig supported the aristocrats and the landowners. Now, during and after the Glorious Revolution, Queen Mary and King William Orange ruled with the support of both the parties. Now, we have to understand that these two parties, the Whig and the Tory, originated during 1670s or 1680s, but once they were in existence, they played major roles in the monarchical rules or in every part of dynasty, in every part of rule in Britain. For example, when Mary and William of Orange ruled with the support of both the parties, a separate group called Jacobites still remained loyal to the monarchical cause. So, after the Glorious Revolution, I told you that Mary and William of Orange came to power. They were joint monarchs and they ruled with the support from both the parties. They sought support from both the parties, the Whigs and the Tories. Although a separate group who were not at all supportive of Mary and William of Orange were in existence. A separate group was in existence called the Jacobite group. Jacobite, the name comes from the supporter of James II. Jacobite from James. When Queen Anne came to power in 1702, she sought support only from the Tories. Now this again shifted the balance. This disturbed the balance. Support only from the Tories and tried to brush aside the Whigs or the Junto Whigs. Now in your novel you will have reference to the Junto Whigs or the Junto ministers or the Junta Whigs. But the Queen was forced to bring balance between the two parties. So Queen Anne was not initially a monarch who sought support from both the parties. She was a monarch who sought support only from the Tories, and she did not at all care for the Whigs. or the Junto Whigs. Junto is actually a faction within the Whig party, and in modern day politics also we have many factions within a political party. You look around, if you look around, you will find it. So Junto party is a faction within the Whig party, and this Queen Anne did not seek support from the Whigs party initially, but later on she was forced to bring a balance. Now, when George I came to power in 1714, the Whig gained ascendancy. So again, this shifted the balance. When Queen Anne came to power, now look at the history. When there was the joint rule of Mary and William of Orange, there was a balance between the two parties, because William of Orange and Mary took advice from both the parties. When Queen Anne came to power, she sought support, she took advice only from the Tories. Now, when George I came, he took advice only from the Whigs. So there was continuous shift in balance. There's a continuous shift in balance. Now, from 1714, when the Hanoverian dynasty came, Whig party remained as the undisputed power, and Robert Walpole was the leader in this time. And this, I also think you need to know the exclusion crisis. This is not a major thing, but I think you should know what is this, the exclusion crisis. The exclusion crisis refers to the period in 1680s when the Whigs tried to prevent James I, who was brother of King Charles II, to ascend to the throne of Britain. So the Whigs, who were not monarchical, who were the supporters, as I told you, of the aristocrats, the landowners, the rising middle class, tried to prevent James I from getting to the throne of England. But the Tories, as I told you, who were supporters of monarchy and who were bent on Catholicism, bent to the side of Catholicism, or against the bill. So this created a shift again between the two parties. While the Tory parties were against the exclusion bill, against the exclusion crisis, the Whig party tried to support the exclusion bill, tried to support the exclusion crisis. And I hope you understand that the name exclusion stands for the exclusion of monarchy, exclusion of Catholicism from the throne of England, from the monarchical rule. Hence the name exclusion. Now, so with this in our background, at the back of our mind, the Whig party and the Tory party, the Restoration, Glorious Revolution, Queen Anne's reign, George I's reign, Catholicism, Protestantism, Anglicanism, we may read Gulliver's Travels now, the novel. Now, first I will chalk out the references. How does the novel refer to contemporary political events, contemporary political incidents? Now, commentators and critics have pointed out that the voyage to the Lilliput corresponds to the second half of the reign of Queen Anne. That is, second half means 1707 to 1714. I repeat, Queen Anne's reign is from 1702 to 1714, but the second half actually refers to 1707 to 1714. Now, Gulliver's fate corresponds to the fate of Earl of Oxford, and Bolingbroke when they temporarily fell from power. So critics and commentators have tried to bring a parallelism Gulliver's fate, between Gulliver's fate and the fates of Earl of Oxford and Bolingbroke when they temporarily fell from power in 1708. This is a parallelism, as commentators have pointed out. Now, apart from referring to some situations, the novel also refers to some individuals. Here, Flimnap. He was the treasurer of Lilliput's, and he is depicted after Robert Walpole. And as I told you, Robert Walpole was an undisputed Whig leader who became very powerful when George I came to power in 1714, and who continued to dominate the political circle till 1760, which is not important here because the novel was published, the Gulliver's Travels was published in 1726. So we are not concerned after 1726 or what happened after 1726. Swift opposed him, that is this man, Robert Walpole, on religious, political, economic and Irish issues. And so it also satirized him in another writing called An Encounter of the Court and the Empire of Japan. I have referred to it, I have written it, you may refer to it in passing, although this is not necessary. Swift satirized him in another writing called An Account of the Court and the Empire of Japan. The novel also refers to Reldresal, Principal Secretary of Private Affairs, and critics have pointed out that this man can be identified with various Whig leaders who acted in their whims into various administrative affairs. Now, these two persons, Flimnap and Reldresal, along with other persons, are referred to in the narrative. For example, you will find reference to Duke of Marlborough. He was a Tory leader. Duke of Marlborough was a real character. Flimnap and Reldresal are fictitious characters. Duke of Marlborough was a real character who was a Tory leader. And so, as a Tory leader, he was a supporter of monarchy. But he betrayed James II during Glorious Revolution. His sympathy towards Prince Anne, who became Queen Anne, was very famous, was very well known. He served as Captain General in the War of Spanish Succession, and he died in 1722. Okay, so this Duke of Marlborough, who was a Tory man, again is very important because he betrayed James II during the Glorious Revolution. James II had to give away his power to Mary and William of Orange. Now, Duke of Marlborough acted in this time as a kind of betrayer to James II, because he was sympathetic later on to Prince Anne. Prince Anne and Mary, wife of William of Orange, are two sisters. So when Mary was in power along with her husband William of Orange, Anne was also there as princess, and Anne became the monarch after William of Orange died in 1702. But this Duke of Marlborough served as the Captain General in the War of Spanish Succession. Now, I'll talk about that later on. I'll refer to two wars particularly: the war with Catholic France and the War of Spanish Succession. These two wars are very important insofar as the contemporary socio-political situation is concerned. The narrative also refers to Lord Godolphin. Lord Godolphin was also a Tory leader. So the narrative refers to two Tory leaders, actually, Duke of Marlborough and Lord Godolphin. Apart from these two, the narrative, as I told you, refers to this Earl of Oxford, who was Henry St. John. Earl of Oxford, who was Robert Harley, and the narrative also refers to Bolingbroke. Bolingbroke was Henry St. John. So you remember these four names: Duke of Marlborough, Lord Godolphin, Earl of Oxford, and Bolingbroke. Now the references made to the Tories and the Whigs through the high hills and the low hills respectively, to the Roman Catholics and the Protestants through the big Indians and the little Indians respectively, to the war with Catholic France between 1689 to 1697, and to the War of Spanish Succession between 1701 to 1713 through the obstinate War of 6 and 30 moons past. Everything draws us to parallelism. So in various chapters, particularly in chapter 4, you will find these references to the high hills and the low hills, to the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, to the big Indians and the little Indians, and to the obstinate war for 6 and 30 moons past. So the novel allegorically or undercover refers to some contemporary events. And the high hills and the low hills refer to the Tories and the Whigs respectively. The big Indians and the little Indians refer to the Roman Catholics and the Protestants respectively. And the obstinate war refers to the two wars, that is the war with France, which took place between 1689 to 1697, and to the War of Spanish Succession between 1701 to 1713. I told you that one of the leaders, that is Duke of Marlborough, acted as the Captain General during this War of Spanish Succession. Now the references continues as the chapters go on. I have quoted some lines from chapter 4. The two mighty powers have been engaged in a most obstinate war for 6 and 30 moons past. So this again is a clear reference to England's war with Catholic France and England's engagement in Spanish Succession War. Right, Spanish Succession War was ended with the Treaty of Utrecht. That is very important. Treaty of Utrecht, which was signed in 1713. The thing is that the 4th chapter delineates on the war, but the 5th chapter, to maintain chronology even in representation, the 5th chapter of the first voyage focuses on the consequences of the wars. Now, what was the consequence of the war? War with France and war of Spanish Succession. The Tory party is believed to have secretly negotiated with France. I told you, I referred to some Tory leaders, Duke of Marlborough and Lord Godolphin, and they are believed to have secretly negotiated with Catholic France. And that was the time when the Whig party was in power. So when the Tory party could not negotiate with Catholic France openly, publicly, they negotiated for the culmination of the war secretly from back door. Now, the Whig leaders accused the Tory leaders. That England or Britain was denied of her right because the Tory leader negotiated, and thus the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 was signed. And this treaty could have been signed in a better way, as some of the Whig leaders argued, as some of the Whig leaders used to think. It is because of the role of the Tory leaders, secret role of the Tory leaders, that England lost some of his footage, some of her upper hand in the war. Now this has a reference to the narrative as well. I will argue later on. Now, the Whig actually wanted the total defeat of France. The Whig party actually wanted the total defeat of France, just as the Lilliput, the emperor of Lilliput, wanted to make the land of the Blefuscu, or the land of the Blefuscudians, a colony. See how the reference goes. As the Whig party wanted total defeat of France, the emperor of Lilliput also wanted total defeat of the Blefuscudians. Hence, you have to understand that, as I told you, Swift changed his political faith from being a member of the Whig party to being a member of the Tory party. Now, when the Tory party is believed to have secretly negotiated with the Catholic France, Swift or Gulliver seems to have taken side with the Tory party, because by that time Swift also changed his political faith to Tory party. So this is how the parallelism or the references goes on. Next, now I have quoted some parts. Let me read them out. And from this time began an intrigue between His Majesty and a junta of ministers, as I told you, junta Whigs or junta Whigs or junta of ministers. And the junta of ministers maliciously bent against me. This you will find in chapter number 5. In chapter number 6, when Reldresal comes to Gulliver to inform him about how he got his Charter of Liberty under certain conditions, the secretary informs him that two factions disturb the native peace, namely Tramaxan and Slamaxan. Now, these two factions clearly bear correspondence to the Tory party and the Whig party, respectively. Now, again, this is very important, the article of impeachment. This you will find in chapter number 7. Now, this alludes to the impeachment. Now, what happens in the narrative, in the novel? In the novel, as Gulliver was not ready to accept the proposal of the emperor of the Lilliputs, that the Blefuscudians should be made, the land of the Blefuscudians should be made a colony, and the land would be governed by a viceroy. Some charges were brought against Gulliver. Gulliver was accused of some things. Now this accusation, this impeachment, alludes to the impeachment of the Tory leaders, namely Earl of Oxford, Bolingbroke, Ormonde, by George I's Whig government. As I told you, when George I came to power in 1714, the Whig also came to power. Now this George I's Whig government also accused the Tory leaders on charges of high treason. Now again, you have a reference. As Bolingbroke and Ormond fled to France, Gulliver also very significantly escapes to Blefuscu. So you have clear references with contemporary events, with contemporary political situations. Now, so far I have talked about the first voyage, and in the first voyage you have lots of references to contemporary political events and narrative. But in the second voyage also you have some references. Now, while discussing the second voyage, let me refer to two critics. And I'll also refer to these two critics in my conclusion part. But before that, while discussing the second voyage, let me refer to two critics. One critic is Arthur Case and another critic is J.A. Downey. One critic is Arthur Case and another critic is J.A. Downey. Now, Arthur Case in his book called Four Essays on Gulliver's Travels, Arthur Case in his book called Four Essays on Gulliver's Travels argues that the first and the third voyages are very important insofar as these two voyages refer to contemporary political events, and they are examples of examples of satire. But the second and the fourth voyage, in your syllabus you have only the first two voyages, you don't have the third voyage and the fourth voyage. But Arthur Case argues that the second and the fourth voyage are utopian. That's why, see, they are utopian commonwealths. That's why these two voyages do not bear that much references as the first and the third voyages. But denying Arthur Case, Downey argues, J.A. Downey, and Downey argues in the article called Political Characterization in Gulliver's Travels. In your answer, you please refer to these critics and the name of these books, or name of this book and article, because if you refer to these book and articles, your answer will automatically be enriched. Now, Downey denying Arthur Case says that the most potent and deliberate Swiftian satire on topical politics is made not in a voyage to Lilliput, but in the unduly neglected voyage to Brobdingnag. So Downey, now why does Downey say this? Now Downey says and argues because Downey thinks that the second voyage also holds some contemporary parallelism. Now, what is this reference? Now, Downey says, look at the quotation. Look at the quotation. This quotation. It was precisely Walpole's role as arch-corrupter of parliaments that Swift sought to censor most vehemently. This you have to remember. It was precisely Walpole's role as arch-corrupter that Swift sought to censor most vehemently. Now, when Gulliver delineates on the English culture and customs to the Brobdingnag, or to the king of the Brobdingnag, he very deliberately underlines how the people at the House of Commons are freely picked and culled out by the people themselves. Now, the use of the word freely here, this word is very important. Gulliver very deliberately puts emphasis on the use of the word freely because critics have commented that by this, Swift or Gulliver tries to underline what happens in his own motherland during George I's period. That Robert Walpole, uh, being or as an undisputed Whig leader, does what he does or what he thinks is best. He recruits officers, he conducts elections, he runs his government as he thinks is best. So it is completely a kind of Walpolean whims that exist, and it is because of Walpolean whims that a corruption also exists in England. That's why the use of the word freely is very, very important here. Now, Gulliver's description of English cultures and custom is actually Swift's attitude to Walpolean government or the Jacobite propaganda against the Hanoverian Whig state. Now, I told you what is Jacobite, and I also told you what is Hanover, or what is called Hanoverian dynasty. So, when Gulliver actually criticizes or offers or puts emphasis on the word freely, he actually criticizes the Walpolean government, and Gulliver takes side Gulliver's attitude reflects the attitude to the Walpolean government or the Jacobite propaganda against the Hanoverian Whig state. Now, so you can understand that just as the first voyage refers to contemporary political events, incidents, just as the first voyage refers to contemporary political events and narrative, the second voyage also refers to some contemporary political events. Now let us try to discuss whether Gulliver's Travels, which is a satire on human nature, can serve as an allegorical representation of contemporary socio-political events. I mean, the problem is this: whether Gulliver's Travels refers to only contemporary events, individuals' situation as events and individuals, or Gulliver's Travels refers to those things, those individuals, those situations, those political narratives as types. Because Gulliver's Travels is a very famous satire, and as we are reading Gulliver's Travels in 21st century, it proves the fact that it is still relevant in today. So why is this so? Why is Gulliver's Travels is relevant today? I argue, or it can be argued, that Gulliver's Travels is relevant because of its transcendental quality, because it cuts across the temporal boundary. Because while it refers undoubtedly contemporary political events, contemporary political situations, incidents, individuals, it does not stop referring to them as individuals. It refers to them as types which are present in all ages. Now, this I will argue using two critics, Arthur Case, as I told you, Arthur Case and J.A. Downey. Again, I will argue using those two documents, that is Arthur Case's book, 4 Essays on Gulliver's Travels, and J.A. Downey's article, Political Characterization in Gulliver's Travels. Now, Arthur Case's book, Arthur Case actually refers to this in the chapter called, and I have written the chapter, Personal and Political Satire in Gulliver's Travels. Now, Arthur Case argues that Swift's satire is directed against individuals and particular situations. But Downey in that article, Political Characterization in Gulliver's Travels, sees character not as individuals but as types. As I told you, this is very important. Not as individuals but as types. here, not as individuals but as types. As he thinks that the satire is directed against the policies and measures and not men. This is a quotation from Downey's article, Political Characterization in Gulliver's Travels. That Downey says that the satire is directed not against individuals but against policies and measures. That means Downey sees the satire as a type. Whereas Arthur Case sees the satire as directed against individuals and particular situations. Now, why is this? Let me delve deep into it. Delve deep into it. Downey affords that Arthur Case's argument of a chronological representation of such political events that had taken place during the second part of Queen Anne's reign is neither adequate nor effective. Rather, Downey suggests that Case's argument is erroneous and unhistorical. Now, Downey gives example. Downey produces proof. What is the proof? For example, the impeachment designed by Bolgolam and Flimnap and other officials does not reflect the incidents that happened to Marlborough and other contemporary Tory leaders. Right, so the impeachment that was brought against Gulliver, which Case argues refers to the impeachment brought against or the charge brought against Marlborough and other leaders by George I and his Whig government, does not reflect Gulliver's case, because Downey remarks, and I quote, "The names coined are meant to personify not the particular holder of the office, but the office itself." Let me repeat the quote. "The names coined are meant to personify not the particular holder of the office, but the office itself." That's how Downey actually demolishes Case's argument, denies Case's argument that the impeachment of Gulliver refers to the impeachment of Marlborough and other Tory leaders by George I and his Whig government. Again, Downey argues that Oxford's fall from power does not reflect Gulliver's captivation by the Lilliput. I told you that commentators have tried to draw a parallelism between Gulliver's captivation in the first chapter of the first voyage and the Earl of Oxford's fall from power, temporary fall from power. Because Downey argues that there is no substantial evidence to support Arthur Case's mistaken belief that Oxford and Bolingbroke, Earl of Oxford and Bolingbroke, could not openly negotiate with France. Now, here, Case argues that the war with Catholic France were brought to an end because of the secret negotiation of Earl of Oxford and Bolingbroke. But Downey says, no, that was not the case. Downey says the general mood back then was that the war should be ended. So while Arthur Case believes that it is because of secret negotiation of Earl of Oxford and Bolingbroke that the war with Catholic France was brought to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. Downey believes that it is not because of the secret negotiation, but because of the general mood, general public mood, the general public sentiment, which attested that the war should be ended. So that's how Downey demolishes or denies Case's argument, and by thus denying Case's argument, thus Downey establishes the fact that this novel, although refers to contemporary events, contemporary political narrative, individuals, the novel does not stop only referring to them as individuals or events, because the novel is directed against the policies and measures. That's how the novel also attains the status of a great satire, because it is not a political satire as such. As Downey argues, it is a social satire, because the label, if you consider the novel Gulliver's Travels as only a political satire, it tends to limit its applicability. That means if you consider Gulliver's Travels as only a political satire, then it loses its grip, it loses its overall reference. But if you consider Gulliver's Travels as a social satire, it can be of interest to any age. It can be applicable, or it can have greater applicability. This is what Downey argues. And thus we may say that Swift gets to the status of a great satirist by virtue of his ability to generalize his target. So Swift is a satirist who does not particularize his target, but generalizes his target. And Swift's satire diverges from targeting any individual in a direct manner. Rather, he takes up contemporary issues, puts them under sufficient cover, under sufficient garb, and he generalizes them. Sometimes that generalization becomes very obscure, but still, the fact that Swift has the ability to generalize gains him the status of a great satirist, not just of 18th century, but perhaps of all ages. I stop here. If you have any questions, any doubt, any queries, or anything related to this lecture, you may ask me over telephone, you may send me email. I will try to answer them as I get your responses. I stop here. Thank you.